I've known our next presenter, George Westerman, for coming on 20 years now, and I thought he had absolutely lost the ability to surprise me with his research. But it turns out I'm dead flat wrong because George is here to tell us about the benefits of playing video games at work.
It's really been 20 years, hasn't it? It's close to 20 years. Wow. I knew him when he didn't know how to give a presentation. Now look at him. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, this project, I got to say, of all the projects I've done here at the IDE and the CDB before that, this is probably the most fun project. And it is about video games, and it is about, you could think of it as a small, just cute little experiment. It is, but I think it's got big implications beyond there for policy and for also how you might want to think about managing your company. I do want to thank the Prudential people. So Kimberly and Andrea are here. They are sponsoring this research, and they are the lab rats that we're working with. So thank you for that. So what it takes to succeed in the digital economy, Prudential has a digital organization. They're just launching that. They're trying to get the right people in there. And as you know, that's hard, because in general, when you don't turn the screen off, there we go. In general, there is a skills gap out there, right? And there's a lot of argument about the skills gap. Is it not the right workers? Are we not able to find people? But let's just say, let's take the easy side of it, that the skills are there and we can't find them. That's still a tricky problem to solve. What do we know about skills? Well, certainly this is work from David Autor from a while back. If you want to know anything about labor economics, look up David Autor's work. It's brilliant. We build on it all the time. And what David did is he said, let's look at jobs over a couple decades here. Which ones are growing and which ones are shrinking? I don't know whether you can read those lines at the bottom, but basically, if you're doing routine work, you don't want to be in that job anymore. That it's the non-routine stuff that keeps on growing. And that's about a decade ago, and it keeps on going. This is work from most recently from Deming, and what he shows here, it's hard to read the lines, but the routine work first disappeared from the low end of the skill distribution. Then as automation got better, it disappeared from the middle end of the scale distribution, and lately it's been disappearing from the top end. You do not want to be in routine work. Luckily, most of us are not, so that's a good thing. But what work do you want to be in? So this is the work that Frank and Eric and I have been doing. Frank presented it so nicely earlier today. If there are 7 skills here, which ones matter? Well, the answer Frank gave was, let's see which ones get paid more. Okay. And what gets paid more, interestingly, is supervision, initiative, but not the physical, not the teamwork. So that's good. So we can figure out now, the economy is hiring more people that have supervision work. The economy the economy's paying more for supervision work, it's paying more for initiative. Is it actually hiring them? This is some new work. Eric, you haven't even seen this yet. Some work that Meng Lu has joined this team of me and Eric and Frank to look at this idea of initiative. And what we find, it's interesting, this is plotting out about a decade of job growth. The jobs these are the terciles of initiative. And if you're low in initiative, your job is barely growing over that time. If you're in the middle, the jobs that are growing are the ones that are high in initiative. So that's good, right? And it's actually even more interesting than that, because when we look at it in terms of routine, the jobs that are growing are the ones that are high in initiative and low in routine. So that's great. So we have an idea where we want to go. Initiative matters, supervision matters, some of these things. The problem we got there is, how do you figure out about that? How do you figure out who's actually high in initiative? How do you figure out who's high in supervision? You can look at their resume, right? You can look at whether they got a college degree or not, and that's problematic, as Frank talked about it. There's even one more problem here, which is that while we can talk about a lot of things like supervision as a skill, while we think about job requirements in terms of those things, how is initiative a skill? I think it's actually probably a personality type. Some people just have more stick-to-itiveness, more grit, right? We don't talk about that in the literature on what we're doing, about what jobs grow, what jobs don't, what job requirements are out there. So where is this study about, really? Well, if we were to, we certainly don't talk about being able to run a clicker. There we go. Where this job's going is, we've been spending a lot of time in the the literature talking about routine and non-routine jobs. We've been talking about manual and cognitive jobs. There's nothing in the whole story about personality. And yet we have some data that says personality matters. And what we want to do is start looking and saying, where does it fit in here? Where does certain kinds of personalities fit better with routine or non-routine work and that kind of thing? So that's the long story of our fun, cute experiment. But the question is, how do you measure it? How are you ever going to measure things like initiative and creativity? Okay? And that's the problem. And the answer is video games. Okay? So, interviews, listen, we've all taken, by the way, the forms where you fill out what is your personality like. And honestly, I can give you any personality you want. Just tell me you want, I'll fill out the forms the right way, right? And then we got behavioral interviewing, and those are very much subject to bias. They're also very expensive, but they try to get it. But what they're really getting is the act I'm putting on at the moment. What the really cool thing about video games, we're working with a company called NAC. Eric's on the advisory board for it. NAC has you play 3 odd little video games, and they measure your personality. They measure your initiative. They measure your creativity. They measure your risk tolerance. They even measure whether you're more likely to cheat or not. And they tell you a personality test as a result of that. So NAC looks like this. That's one of the games. In this game, you have to serve sushi. And you got to serve the right sushi to the right people. And they get angry if you don't serve them. They get angry if you serve them wrong. And then you got to decide whether you help the angry people or the happy people first. And this all tells things about you. There are other ones where you got to solve a maze. There are other ones where you got to fling water balloons at these flaming meanies that are coming to destroy your town, right? But what you get in the end is a set of big data analyses on micro activities in the video game that tell something about you. And so you play these games, spend about 45 minutes doing it. It gives you these little badges. That's all really cool. NAC is making a lot of money. It's a really neat company. I'm glad I didn't have to invent this. We're just using it. Okay? And so what does the experiment look like? We're going through 3 waves at the Prudential, having people play these games and comparing their personality profiles from the games to their performance on the job. So that we can start to say, to what extent does personality explain more than all the other stuff we know that should explain about job performance? And so we're starting right now with the call center. We have about 200 people. If you know Prudential, it's a big financial services firm, kind of complex products. People call in, you got to solve their problems. You also had to be nice to them at the time, but at the same time as you're solving their problem and being nice to them, you need to get them off the phone as fast as possible. Okay? That's a complex set of behaviors that need to be managed, and they measure these things pretty well. So we have about 200 people going through the call center. I'm going to report results on a very tiny sample because the data is just coming in. Hussein and I have been spending a lot of late nights analyzing this data, getting ready for today. So I'll report a little bit on that. But coming up soon, if that's one job that's relatively routine and interpersonal, all the college interns are about to hit the Prudential in about a month. We're going to run them through. Highly motivated people across a set of jobs, and then we'll figure out where we're going to go from there. So let's talk about the call center. If I were to talk to you about things like initiative, grit, leadership, interpersonal skills, composure, poise, you have kind of a picture in your mind about what a call center rep looks like, do you? One thing I know a call center rep looks like is somebody who's not me. I think that job would drive me absolutely insane, right? But there are people that are good at it, and they do really well. So you got this picture in your mind of what it takes to make a good call center rep. Let me just show you what we're seeing from the first bit on what the average call center rep looks like. Okay. First of all, they show an awful lot of empathy. They show an awful lot of composure, extroversion, exactly what you'd expect in somebody that is supposed to take care of people all day. Right? These are, by the way, are on average on a 0 to 1 scale. So when you're up around 60, 55, 60, that's actually a pretty high score. Okay? So they look like people. That makes sense. They also show an awful lot of grit and diligence. They're able to kind of really just solve the problem as opposed to just blowing it off. And you kind of expect that. That's important for being in a call center, right? Perseverance. And as mind-numbing as I would consider that job to be, These people actually kind of like it. They've got self-confidence, they got positive outlook, they've got optimism. So that's kind of a nice thing. It says, yeah, this looks like call center reps, right? Well, of course, they're not good at everything. What are they not really very good at? The big cognitive stuff, not a strong suit if you work in a call center. And they're actually not risk takers. One of the lowest scores we've got. This one, actually, I was surprised by. They're not big on self-restraint. But even the most surprising piece out of this study on just what the average call center rep looks like, they're actually very high on leadership behaviors, which I never would have guessed. But if you think about it, it actually is important because these people take charge of a conversation, they bring in whatever tools are needed, and they bring it to a resolution. So one of the things this says right away is, if you're hiring your leaders from college, maybe you ought to be hiring them out of the call center, okay? Except for that cognitive issue. You'd have to work through that one, right? So that's what the average call center rep looks like. And you see why we're having so much fun with this data. This data, by the way, is about 24 hours old, these findings. So that's why the top of this thing says, next time you see me, I will be saying something different, because we're about to get double the amount of data in, and we'll see where that goes, okay? So if that's the average call center rep, oh, by the way, that question mark, these findings will change, question mark. That's what happens at 2 in the morning. There's no question mark. These findings will change, okay? But what does this mean about the good customer service reps? One thing, if you see a call center, these things are measured up and down 1,000 different ways on what it means to be a good call center rep. We luckily have performance measures because Prudential has been so nice to give us that data. And so we can run that number. I should take a step back and tell you how we did this before I get there. Did I skip a slide? Or did I just accidentally hide that slide? I hid the slide. There it is. You might ask, isn't what we're doing kind of illegal? And no, it's not illegal. Is it kind of unethical? No, not really, it's not unethical. But we do want to be really careful with privacy here. And so we were very careful with privacy. So what do we do? If you do a study with MIT, the first thing you have to do is opt into informed consent. It's as bad as if we're going to draw your blood. We have to do the same thing to draw a survey from you. So these people all go through an informed consent process. If they decide to play, we give them an anonymized email account. It was going to be Gmail, and we discovered that Gmail only gives you 3 emails, and then they shut you down. So we now have our own server we're running here for an anonymized account. They play the games with the anonymized data, the anonymized email, so I will never see a name of anybody at Prudential and what they played. Meanwhile, when it's time to get the performance data, the Prudential people take the performance data, put the anonymous name on it, and send it to us. So I've got performance data on employees without their names. But the thing is, all the game data is with the anonymous name, and Prudential will never get the game data. So we're protecting very carefully that the employee, I don't know the employee names, Prudential doesn't know the game performance of any individual, but we're going to share the summary level detail, okay? So we're trying to be very careful on managing people in that process. So back to they're the means, right? So these are the means. I talked about what the average person looks like. What do the best call center reps look like? The answer is, it depends. What are you asking them to do? They're measured a lot of different ways, and different measures have different findings. So we look, for example, at their annual performance reviews. And their annual performance reviews tend to be highly related to these cognitive kind of skills: problem solving, learning agility, critical thinking. It's interesting, the people with less composure seem to be better call center reps. And we were going back and forth on, like, what would that mean, less composure? And the best we can guess at this point is, sometimes the people are so composed you have no idea what they're thinking, and sometimes you want somebody who's going to raise a little bit of a fuss, right? And that seems to be coming out in this data. So if that makes sense, the brighter people, maybe the people that are willing to raise a little bit of a fuss, they're better call center reps. And you think, yeah, okay, that makes sense, right? But maybe not. What other kind of things do we measure in the call center? Well, one of the things we really want to know about in the call center is flow. Flow is how fast are you able to solve a problem and get it done and get on to the next problem. That's a really good thing to measure. That's highly related to cognitive ability, and you would expect that. But the other thing that we spend a lot of time in call centers doing is telling people to behave themselves. So professionalism. Are you being a nice professional person, or are you being a real jerk? Well, it turns out professionalism is associated with less cognitive people. The more cognitive people seem to raise more of a fuss. Also, less executive presence, which is a set of measures that are about self-confidence, resilient, doing your own thing, as opposed to following the rules. So here, being more cognitive might help you with flow, but hurt you with professionalism. What are we measuring in this situation? And then what's also interesting here, this quality measure is a combined measure of professionalism, flow, and a couple other things. And there we find that grit is bad for you. So as we get along this process, as we're trying to measure what a good call center rep is, it also raises the question about what do we want call center people to be? Because if we're measuring them on 3 or 4 things, what are we really getting? Okay. So where are we going with this? Well, I told you, we want to fill out this space. This is one job among a whole set of things where we're going to change the way we think about what it takes to get jobs, what's going to grow, what's not going to grow when we're done with this. We'll do some more jobs at Prudential. If you want to get involved in this, we'd love to work with jobs on your companies too. A lot more occupations to come, a lot more fun stuff to report. So thank you.
Questions for George?
Yes.
First, that was excellent. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
But I do have a question. Are you sampling from big companies, basically? I assume those are the people from whom you draw?
Yeah, we want to have a large enough sample size in any one job. So that tends to be big companies because of that.
So it's either sampling error or it should not be surprising that you find, even though you want initiative and big companies want initiative, people who work at big companies self-select against. Because if you have initiative, you're doing a startup. You'll be frustrated in a big company. You won't last a week because you'll think they're stupid. You talk to any entrepreneur, you'll find what you're looking for. You talk to anyone in a big company, you'll find what you found.
Good point. One of the things we're finding is our Sloan graduates these days don't go to big companies. They're all going to startups. So, yeah. Not to say anything about the big companies that sponsor us, by the way. Yes.
Question on just how you
Wait, where are you?
Right here.
Okay, hi.
Question just on how you measured, the performance of the employees in a job like a call center representative. Because they're serving a customer, would there be more? Further research or even more of an interest to understand how do you measure personality types of an agent with that of the customer? Could that be an alternate way to look at outcomes?
So imagine, the person, somehow we know that the person calling in is a green kind of person, and we hook them up with a green kind of customer service rep, and then the more blue people will get hooked up with blue people. It's kind of a neat idea. Sandy Pentland, who was here earlier, has ways that you can start to measure emotion on the person who's calling you. And you can imagine the next step was that the phone would ring and it'd say, here's a personality type 1 coming in. Who knows? It's kind of neat. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, wait.
So you have these video games. How certain are? Sorry. You have these video games. What have you done to assure yourself that the output of the result really is meanuful?
So that's a really good question. I will leave it up to the people that make the video game because they're selling this a lot. They've done a lot of tests. But here's what we've done. We, first of all, are doing the sniff test on whether the data is right. I've mentioned in the experimental protocol, we have before and after surveys. One of the things we have in the before survey is a 20-item Big 5 personality test. And we're going to run that against and see whether that links up at all. And then, of course, the NAC people have an awful lot of validation they've already done to show that most of their measures are good. Okay, yes, over here.
George, what about people who don't like video games? Did they self-select out, or do they tend to score worse, or how did that play in?
We also have a measure there we haven't run yet. But we have a question, how many hours a week do you play video games? And we got a couple other things like that to get this comfort with technology and see what it's about. Okay? And we got some age questions, some tenure questions to get at that too. Good question. Yes?
I love the video game discussion, but I want to go back to the 7 skills for a second.
Okay.
Because I'm having a lot of heartache over them.
Oh, no. It's all Frank's fault.
Yeah. Think aspects of a job like that your role includes being a supervisor or your role includes being aware. They sound to me like dependent variables, yet the discussion of a skill sounds like an independent variable that's going to drive salary. So I'm a little confused about whether, for example, supervision is an element of the job, and we're just saying, gee, supervisors are getting paid more. Maybe changes in the economy are such that there's more demand and less supply of supervisors, but that doesn't make it a skill. So I'm trying to understand how these skills are being treated as independent variables, as alternatives, let's say to college, which is being thought of as an independent variable.
So to be clear, what we're measuring is not whether the people have the skills, but whether the jobs require the skills and whether there are people in them. So part of your cognitive dissonance at the moment might be that, right, that the job requires it. But the second, I think, is just a labeling, is supervision a skill or is it some meta skill, I think is what you're getting at. Is that where you're going or not?
Well, it's being contrasted with college as if...
Oh, not contrasted.
As if these are things that we might look for, but it's really a description of where we've slotted people in the end. Like you got slotted into a supervisory role, I didn't. That's not a skill. That's a...
Well, we can't see the slotting process. The fact that you landed in that job says to me that you got that skill, and so then we can link that to whether you went to college or not. So we assume that people are in jobs they're fit for, but that's actually a giant question. It's just an assumption we had to make. Now, the question about are we using skills against college, that's not what we're doing. College is a very, very rough measure, and so we're trying to break that down into pieces. And one of the things we find college seems to be associated with is the ability to graduate college is a really strong signal of initiative that other people don't have. Okay. But there are other things. To be a geologist, you're going to learn that in college, and those are skills we did not measure. Okay. Yes?
What's the percentage in performance can you explain using those personal traits?
So I will tell you that next time we run it. The numbers are small enough right now that I don't believe what I'm seeing. So next time I see you when we run a couple hundred people through, I'll share those numbers with you. Okay?